Yes, ma'am. Hold on, here comes, I think we have almost everyone except Jarrell.
Okay.
And Daria, but I'll ping them both and I'll share the agenda now.
Darrell should be joining in the next couple seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
I should, oh, he's not joining. I won't talk about him yet. I was going to say that we have a new minister on our board. Darrell Gaston was recently ordained. And I'll have him share what church that he was ordained with. I don't remember. Do you remember, Ashley?
I do not.
Can everyone see my screen?
No.
Yeah.
Is it just me? Maybe it's me though. Hold tight. Ah, that's great. I've changed my Zoom settings to use both screens, and I usually cover it up. Learning. All right. So has everyone, this agenda has been uploaded into your board booklet. Has each of the board members had an opportunity to review the agenda? And if there are any suggestions or corrections, I'm open to hearing them. And if there are none, I'll accept the motion to accept the agenda as submitted.
Make a motion to accept the minutes as, or the agenda as submitted.
Is there a second?
No, 1 second. Apologies, Clyde. I think there are a couple things that I'd want to add to the agenda under new business.
Sure.
Let's scroll down to new business, scroll down through new business. Okay, perfect. I want to discuss a chief academic officer. And I also want to discuss an HR manager.
Cool.
So I'm going to ask that be asked as a friendly amendment to Clyde, to your acceptance to modify the agenda with 2. I'm going to add it. I'm going to add it as 1 item, Ashley. That's okay.
Sure.
The discussion around 2 new,
Just additional resources.
2 additional resources. Thank you. And is there a second to Clyde's now friendly amended to modify the agenda to include additional resources, letter C under new business?
Second.
Seconded by Reverend Gaston. Reverend Gaston, I just announced that you were ordained. Can you share with us the church that you were ordained with?
It is Universal Life Church.
And he has a bad connection, so Universal Life Church. So Reverend Gaston joins our distinguished crew of clergy on our board and staff.
Congratulations again, Darrell.
Yes, congrats.
Thank you.
So all in favor of the updated agenda to include the new 2 additional resources, all in favor by saying aye, and we'll do a roll call vote, starting with Ms. Javonda Warren.
Aye.
Chris Early,
Aye.
Ashley Mitchell,
Aye.
Layvon Washington,
Aye.
Darrell Gaston.
Aye.
So that reflects unanimous decision to add the discussion to our list of new business for tonight, and we will get started. Joseph, you scroll back to the top. I'm sorry.
I've added the 2 new items to the bottom of this agenda.
Scroll back to the top.
Sure.
Okay. Your June 2021 minutes have been uploaded. Has everyone had an opportunity to review them? And are there any changes to those minutes? If there are none, we'll take a motion to accept the minutes as submitted in your board booklet.
I make a motion to accept the minutes from board bucket.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved, properly seconded by Levon Washington. We're going to vote by saying aye by roll call vote. Chris Early,
Aye.
Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Warren, Miss Warren,
Aye. No, aye.
Miss Mitchell,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
and Mr. Gaston.
Aye.
Thank you. Been moved, properly seconded, voted unanimously to accept the minutes. Are there any guests here or staff who'd like to comment under our public comment slot? Hearing none, we'll move on. So we'll go to our committee reports. Mr. Early, Finance Committee.
Okay, so I'll hop right in. Since we're right at the beginning of this fiscal year, it appears as though expenditures are just starting to ramp up for the year. We're trending on in line with budget versus actuals at this point. My thought is that we'll get more detail as to how we're doing KPI wise in the next upcoming period at our next meeting. But a couple of things I did want to point out, if you go to the July 2021 financials provided by EdOps, again, our cash position was higher than where we thought it would be budgeted the end of the last fiscal year. So we're starting off with a higher cash balance at this point, which is a point of strength as we're looking to initiate any new initiatives during this period. I did want to point out that there are a couple questions I guess I would pose. One, I noticed that there was a comment about us having access to a number of computers and technology that need to be distributed to students. And the question that popped in my mind when I saw that was, at what point do we do that such that students will have access to for the use of that technology? So maybe that's something we can put a pin in to talk through that briefly. As we're continuing to move forward in planning for the new facility, one thing I continue to keep my eye on is how we're doing cash wise, so we can cover whatever FF&E expenses we'll need at that point once the building is ready. Although I know that's a little bit off into the future, it's still something to keep an eye on. I think we're in pretty good shape there. So, overall, I think we're in a good, solid financial position as we're starting things off. The one question I will ask, and maybe that's a question for Julian, is actually, I'm not sure who the question will be for, but what is the process for distributing that new technology to students, and when do we expect to have that done?
Julian, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm actually still driving. There is a huge storm here in Frederick.
Oh, no.
So there is actually the new process of distribution of technology. We actually just came out with a new policy where everything is based on the SSS. The SSS will actually recommend the operations team to issue technology or not based on the needs of the student. That technology will be actually distributed immediately after the SSS proposed to the operations team that the student is in need of technology or Wi-Fi. So that's actually the policy that we have in place. I don't know if that's clear or if you need more.
No, that's clear. And I appreciate you sharing that. Again, I didn't have a huge concern about it. I noted it as something that I thought was interesting, and just wanted to understand better how we get that technology in the hands of the folks who really need to use it. So that's helpful. Outside of that, I don't have anything to add further as it relates to the Finance Committee and Operations reports. If there's other questions, I yield the floor at this point.
Mr. Early, I'd like to just, with your questions around technology, to just share with this body. I was in a conversation over the last couple of weeks. We've been approached by Octo, who is attempting to pilot a program that brings broadband access to the Congress Heights community. And they want to pilot this triangle that looks something like Ballou, St. Elizabeth's, and the Arc, and kind of in that triangle. But it's really about Congress Heights, and Octo is going to spend probably about $1 million in devices to adults. And they want to marry that concept with digital literacy, and they want to track how getting devices and access to target populations that include adult learners, returning citizens, and seniors with their access to city services. And if they can have impact with those populations by providing that access in the community. I learned through that conversation that I said, why don't you just guys spend the money to increase and make sure that DC Wi-Fi works?
Right.
Because literally, if you go into a district government building and try to sign on using DC Wi-Fi, you probably have less service than you have if you don't use it.
Correct.
And they explained to me that public Wi-Fi was never designed to be the last feet of access. It was designed to be just if you're in the town, you want to find out where the bathroom is, or where a restaurant is, or where Metro is, and that's his only purpose in life. I didn't understand that until the last couple of days. But there are providers that the city can buy spectrum from to provide broadband in homes and in neighborhoods across the city. They want to buy some spectrum for this neighborhood, give devices, and then track to see how those uses translate into behavior changes in the population. And I have advanced the conversation that CCPrep should be a partner in that conversation, primarily for a couple of reasons. One, we've probably touched more adult learners than anybody else in Congress Heights. And two, we have some pretty substantial lessons learned that we can build upon on digital literacy training, the help desk, the support that adults need to make the device and Wi-Fi work for them. And third, the ability to deploy devices. I think we've practiced that through COVID. So I think it puts us in a unique position to help the city in this way. So we're still talking about the opportunity, but I think it'll be an opportunity for CCPrep to, one, reduce what we need to spend in technology. If 300 of our students already doubly qualify for this pilot, then that's 300 less devices that we need to buy.
Sure.
It's 300 fewer access points that we have to fund, as well as possibly being able to recruit some of those adults that'll get these devices into our training program. So I'm hopeful that the pilot will be rolled out, and it's going to be on a pretty fast timeline. It looks like they want to roll out in October, but they want to do their first convening in September to kind of get a feel for the kinds of adults that will be targeted for the pilot, and setting what they believe will be a good sample size. It looks like it's going to be somewhere between 25 and 5,000 residents in Congress Heights that will be a part of the program. So keep that in the back of your head as we deal with technology and how we document those lessons that we've learned by trial and error over the last 18 months.
Did you say somewhere between 25 and 5,000?
I did. 2,500 and 5,000.
Oh, 2,500. Okay, I was going to say 25 and 5. That's a huge range, but 2,500 to 5,000.
There's some early conversation. This is a research pilot as much as it is anything else. So being able to meet with the data crunchers about how the program is designed and what those sample sizes need to be will drive kind of how large or how small the pilot is.
That makes sense.
And they're using money from their federal allotment. They kind of put money aside to bridge the digital divide, and they want to use this community because of its unique characteristics around unemployment and education as the pilot for the city.
Monica, I also sat in on some of the planning for that. This is Connie Spinner. And they were looking at one point at how to help parents help their children.
Right.
So adding the platforms that young people most frequently use, particularly in grades 6 through 12, will be extremely helpful.
So excited about the opportunity that might bring. That'll definitely help some of our outlay for device and Wi-Fi. Are there other questions for Mr. Early and or Mr. Garcia around the Finance Committee report out?
Ms. Ray, I will like also to share that we have been approved for FCDL funding. That means that we, throughout this year, we actually will be reimbursed for all the MiFi expenses. So they will actually pay for all the T-Mobile service, and as well as any computer that we actually purchase, laptop computer that we purchase for the students.
And what kind, you said what kind of funding?
FCDL, that's the federal emergency funding that came out for the schools for virtual learning or technology learning.
And I'm sorry, and it funds the Wi-Fi expenses.
It funds all the internet, it funds MiFi, and it funds laptop computer that we would like to purchase.
Interesting. And how do we access those funds?
Apply to our representative for E-rate. So it's actually the E-rate program. So we apply for it, and we approve for that to get 100% reimbursement on the people. And if we decided to purchase any laptop computer, we fully reimbursed for the student laptops.
Gotcha. You were breaking up a little bit, Julian, so we may have lost some in translation, but I look forward to hearing more about that. Any questions for Julian on? So, and I have one question on E-rate. So is our appeal still appealing? And what I guess we've been approved now, and we've got approval to go back and get our last year E-rate, yes?
Yes,
Okay,
we did. Yes, we did. And it was on the basis of that approval of E-rate that we're able to apply for the federal one that that Mr. Garcia is referencing.
So are we still under appeal for the year that we were denied? Or has that been resolved now?
That we've gotten past that, but we're going to have to do the same thing for this funding. And Octo is going to have 3 strands, ultimately, they said, of funding around technology. And so our getting another appeal in will be critically important.
So what are we appealing now?
We're just that we are, in fact, a school.
So let's start up. See, I
Okay,
thought,
can I jump in and clarify?
please, thank you.
Okay, So our appeal is still in process.
Got it.
We were approved for E-rate funding the year after we were originally denied. And so we're using that approval as the basis for going back to during the appeal to say, we got this funding before, we got this funding after, we need this funding for this year that we didn't get it. The FCDL grant that Mr. Garcia is speaking of is separate from that. It's a subset of E-rate funding, but it's separate and apart from the regular E-rate applications that we submit. We had to fill out an application and a survey and then upload all of our invoices to prove we had expenses related to emergency distribution of MiFi and devices. And we are being reimbursed 100% of those expenses that we applied for and showed documentation for.
And so that's all of our laptops, all the MiFis and the internet that we paid for students?
That is correct.
And what is that number?
I'll get that for you by the end of this. I'll pull up my
And so it flows through the normal E-rate channel as reimbursement, or does it come as a special grant?
Oh, it comes as a reimbursement.
Gotcha. And so even some of the laptops are MiFis were never distributed; they were just bought, right?
That's correct.
And so, but all of them, whether they were actually distributed or not, are in the refund request.
Once we distribute them.
Oh, so they had to be distributed to
That's
get.
correct. Yes. We had the part of the funding was acknowledging that we still have a need for funding to distribute devices. And this is the need we are presenting, and then we received the funding based on that.
And I know that we were kind of getting equipment as it became available, and then we replaced some. But have we purchased all of the devices that we think that we need now, or are we still in the procurement stage?
Right now we're on pause on the procurement stage because everything is so much more expensive right now that DNS has suggested we pause because the quantity of technology we have in stock right now is sufficient for our needs currently, but future expenditures will need to be done. But we're waiting for the supply and demand and global supply chain issues to maybe adjust the pricing back to a more affordable device cost.
Gotcha. I'd like to
Sorry.
see kind of a summary of how many units in total that we've purchased, what we have on hand, just kind of see where we are.
Yes, and we have that inventory in our asset list. Absolutely.
Excellent. Other
Right.
questions for Ashley? Are you saying something? I'm sorry.
I am, yes. I know in earlier meetings, we discussed that a lot of equipment had been distributed and not yet, been returned. So because we're having so many issues with the global supply chain and we've kind of been put on hold as far as ordering new inventory, are we doubling down on the efforts to retrieve the items we've distributed?
At this point, the computer, we actually just send a command lock on all the computers that we didn't get back. That means that the computer actually, no one will be able to use it unless the computer is reformatted. If the computer is reformatted again and just set up as new, you'll still be able to use it. But at this point, that is actually the only thing that we can do. Based on the conversation that we are actually having internally, I think at this point, CCPrep will have to assume that of those 273 computers, if I am not mistaken, I will have a correct number for you soon. They will be lost assets at this point, since we are not able to contact the students nor by phone nor by email. And whenever actually we try to call them, they actually get pretty upset about us calling us for their computer.
Amazing. So, oh, go ahead, Ashley. I'm sorry.
Thanks. So along with the laptops, were MiFi's distributed as well? So does that number the same for MiFi's?
The MiFi's is actually less, and the MiFi's were actually suspended, and they are actually being removed of our account by next week. So those MiFi's, they haven't been able to use them for the last month, and we only got 6 requests to reassign those MiFi's. However, the MiFi's were a little bit more, it's a little bit easier to control since we actually have we actually have control with them, and we can just remove them. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Julian.
Other questions for the Finance Committee? And I have one question, Julian. We clearly met our savings goal last year, and the board has a policy to transfer the 10% goal to reserve. Have you finished your closeout yet?
The only thing that we actually pending is the store. We're waiting for reimbursement. We actually got the reimbursement from store 2019. Now we are actually entered that information into the books, and the books will be actually closed by the end of this month entirely. And we will start the process of can you hear me?
I think I heard you.
I didn't get much of that.
I think I heard you say that you're waiting on the SOAR reimbursement to officially close. As soon as you enter that into the books, they'll be closed. Julian?
That's what I heard him say, yes.
Okay. That's what
And then he'll move into the audit.
Got it. We had talked about a few months ago, the creation of the grant report out, like where we are from a profit and loss perspective for each revenue stream. Where are we on that report out?
We have that document ready to go. We had to adjust our template to align with the EdOps template that they use, so that we were looking at apples to apples when we were doing data sharing between CCPrep and EdOps. So we can provide access to that. It's an Excel spreadsheet. We can provide access to that because it also aligns with how it's accounted for in QuickBooks.
Got it. And when can we get that?
I can get that to you by Friday.
Mr. Gaston, Mr. Washington, Ms. Warren, Mr. Edwards?
No questions on my end.
No questions.
No questions.
Excellent. We'll move to governance. Ms. Mitchell.
Sure thing. Had an opportunity to connect with a couple of folks who were on the line. I was only able to log on briefly, unfortunately, but just a few quick report outs. I know we discussed getting a little more detailed in our reporting, just to ensure that, the board is getting, enough information to make decisions by. Also, working on more closely aligning our pre-testing with our recruiting processes. It's time that we, get a little bit more aggressive with the way that we approach, meeting more metrics than just our recruiting metrics. So we need to be sure to align our pre-testing with recruiting, just to pay more attention to the rest of the metrics we're liable for. We also need to do a little investigation into policy associated with establishing a new unit, just so we can get some clarity on the designation of the wellness unit, whether we're sticking with unit or if it's a program. Because if we determine that the unit wasn't properly established, we'll likely have to just integrate it as a program into the SEM unit. I know we've had discussion around that, and more discussion to come. Also, we need to get more aggressive in our pursuit to improve our tier standing. You know, I don't think that we've been operating with enough urgency or alarm regarding our status. I understand that we won't, you know, be assessed again here for the next couple years. But in the meantime, we need to be really aggressively improving our standing. And that is what I've got. Is if anyone has anything to add with outcomes of that meeting.
Anybody with any additional comments on the governance report out? Development fundraising committee report. I'll start because it's probably not very much to report out on. We aired and didn't invite the new development person to the meeting, and we moved to correct that now. Ms. Spinner spoke about the the application to Chase Bank for 180 at the request of the new community banking vice president, Brian Atkins. And we're still waiting to hear back. We were supposed to hear in August, and I guess technically we have a few more days in August from our Advancing Cities grant with JP Morgan Chase. So we're still waiting anxiously to hear on their decisions for that. I would have expected them to respond before now. As a follow-up in this committee is an outstanding request from the board for the internal tracking document that tracks opportunities that we've applied for that are upcoming and the status on all of them. Ms. Spinner has agreed to share that outstanding request with the new development person as well, and update the board with that tracking sheet so that we can see kind of where we are on the fundraising spectrum. My guess is we will need to create new targets for this year based on our board retreat we just finished as a goal, but I wanted to follow up on getting the tracking sheet established so we'll see where our baseline was for this past school year. Are there any questions on either governance or development fundraising? I guess we have, so our old business and new business, there's really a blurred line because these are kind of old conversations, but these represent our two vote items that have been uploaded into your board booklet. The first is, so that shouldn't say expenditure policy, it should say capitalization policy. I almost didn't recognize what it was. That we increased, this request comes as a policy change from the operations unit to increase the minimum threshold of items that are purchased that should be capitalized rather than expensed. In our previous policy, that threshold was $500. And what that basically meant was a headache for Julian in that every laptop that we bought required a capitalization in the accounting books rather than simply being expensed off. So we've raised that threshold to $1,000. And my question, Julian, is before we vote on this new capital expenditures policy, does the $1,000 threshold achieve what you want it to achieve?
Yes, that definitely will make sense.
Okay.
I think that's a perfect line.
Excellent. So I'm going to accept this finance committee recommendation to approve the new capital expenditures policy that increases the threshold from $500 to $1,000 per expense before an item needs to be capitalized. Are there any questions from the board? Is there a second on that motion from Mr. Early?
Second.
second by Ashley Mitchell, and we'll do a roll call as usual for approval. Mr. Early,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Gaston,
Aye.
Miss Mitchell,
Aye.
Miss Warren,
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Let the record reflect a unanimous vote to support the new policy around capitalized expenditures. Our next policy is, I lost the screen for some reason. Did you stop your share screen maybe, Jones? Or is it just me?
No, it's me.
Oh, okay.
The next one is the vaccination.
Vaccination policy with much conversation and lots of discussion around how we create a policy, but not only that, how to create a policy that we believe is effective, that protects our environment, as well as that does not create additional headache for our staff. We recognize that our staff, particularly in operations where most of these tasks have rest before this policy, not wanting to overburden any one particular staff person, nor trying to protect the integrity of the process. We recognize that when peers begin to monitor one another, it could create some tension. And we've tried to figure out how to actually facilitate a vaccination policy. So as you guys have probably heard, but I'll repeat, based on the mayor's order, as an LEA, we are not subject to a mandatory vaccination in and of itself. In our role, however, as a contractor to the OSSI, we are subject. Our contractors and volunteers are subject to the VAX policy. So we are a mandatory vaccination site, and there are exceptions for either religious or medical exemptions. In either case, so there's no option to just say, I'm not going to be vaccinated. If you choose not to be vaccinated, you cannot work for CCPrep. If you have an approved exemption from either your primary medical doctor by certified letter, or from your faith leader by certified letter for exemptions, if you fall in either of those two categories, you will be subject to weekly test. One of the things the board wrestled with over the weekend was the fact that if we required one test for a start on Monday, there were still days of the week that were left uncovered. So we've amplified the policy over 1 weekly test to 2 weekly tests. The test results need to be presented on Mondays and Thursdays. We have searched for opportunities that would reduce the cost, because the employees would be responsible for any cost associated with their COVID testing. And we've tried to find ways to reduce that cost as much as possible. One of the opportunities to reduce cost is the Anacostia Library provides free COVID testing. If you are to test at that site prior to 8 p.m. on Thursdays, you could have your email test results back to you by Sunday. And that would give you your test for your Monday submission. And we would test again on Mondays after the weekend for results that come back on Thursday. So everybody gets vaccinated. If you have a medical or religious exemption, you are subject to twice weekly COVID results. Now we recognize that that's a whole process in of itself. We don't know how many yet. I know at last chat with Lodi, we were about 50% vaccinated. I'm not sure that number has moved at all since our last chat. But based on the number of people who may have either medical or religious exemptions, the process will be Gaston and Ashley will convene. Jason has educated me that the last day for people who are going to get a 2-shot vaccination is the 29th, Jason? Or 28th?
It's this Saturday. So the 28th.
28th. The 28th would be the last opportunity for people to begin that process in order to be in full compliance by September 19th, as indicated by the mayor's order. So if the board votes to approve this policy, we would need to immediately notify staff that they need to begin that process to get vaccinated timely before the 19th, or submit the appropriate paperwork for that exemption. Mr. Gaston and Ms. Mitchell will meet with staff on the 18th. Nope, on the 17th, I guess, of September. And they will collect vaccination cards for the HR file. And you're probably wondering, why would board members do that? Because we don't have the HR function covered outside of our existing staff. And we wanted to try to remove as much of the medical responsibility from existing staff. Otherwise, it would be Mr. Garcia collecting vaccination cards and COVID tests twice a week. The second thing that we've done is we've also explored T-Shield 3. Nope. Shield 3. Jason, help me.
Shield T3.
Shield T3.
Shield T3. Thank you. Shield T3 that will come on site to administer COVID tests. What we've learned from that process, though, is there still needs to be a person who is the official observer and make sure that you produced enough saliva for the tube for adequate testing. There are some small nuances with the test. Each of the exempted staff people will have individual tests, but they must also sample 10% of our student population. So there will be 60 students that would need to be tested, and they do what's called pool testing. So everybody spits into their own collector, but the saliva is mixed into a big pool and tested. And if indeed there's COVID presence in that big pool, then they will go back and test each of the individual vials to determine who's positive.
That is gross.
Yeah, the challenge, you got your own vial to spit in, so it's not a collective.
Yeah, but when you say a big pool of spit, you just
It's
imagine
the
a
nastiest
big
thing
old
I have ever
above
heard.
ground swimming pool.
Discharge of saliva.
I was thinking to say a big vat of, I think it sounds better than a big vat of spit, which was my first thought.
That's even worse.
Actually getting nauseous right now. So if we could change the subject, that'd be amazing.
I was gonna say, moving right along.
So, but one of the things it's important as leadership, because it's going to be you guys who are going to have to carry this message to your subordinates and to your peers, is that this whole COVID thing has been a pain in the neck, to say the least, right? We've had almost all of us know someone who's lost someone, or we've had family members who've been affected by this disease. So it's nothing that we take lightly. And we're doing all that we can do to be as safe as possible. But we recognize that as an adult school, we don't have the benefit of having vax cards for our students like a K-12 school. And just so you know, even K-12 schools, COVID-19 is not one of the required vaccinations yet. I foresee that it will become one, but as of right now, it's not. And we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can do to create the safest environment possible. But one of the things that we have to continue to reinforce is our mask wearing, right? The one thing that is as important, if not more important than vaccination, is being very careful in your environment and wearing your mask and washing your hands. But it is where we find ourselves for now, and we'll need to get started right away to implement. So the 2 board members will collect those initial vax cards, get them into the appropriate staff files, and then we'll need to internally figure out how the collection and observation of test results will work. And we've looked at opportunities from everything from, do you hire a part-time person who becomes the spit watcher? Do you bring a contractor in who has a spit watcher? Don't know the answer yet, but we recognize that we have to do that. Coupled with, how do we get to a population of students that are going to be on site for this test and when? Right? We know based on our average daily seat attendance, there are days we might not see 60 students on site. So how do we manage that? And Jason has a meeting on Thursday, I think, Jason?
Yes.
That will clarify some of that 10% rule around how we do the random sampling of students. Any questions around vaccination or comment that you want to share before I call for the vote?
Well, now I was also going to add that in case Anacostia Library is too far, it is available at the Bellevue William Lockridge Library, as well as the Benning Road Library as well.
Okay. The one thing that we thought about is it's possible that every school will say to their exempted staff that
yes,
go to Anacostia Library. So, and there's a set number of tests available at each site. So there could be a run on one side or the other. But thank you, Darrell, for advancing Benning Road Library. That's called Dorothy Height Library, right?
Yes, Dorothy Height, yes. Or we could just go past, take them all, and then we'll have them on hand.
Dorothy Height Library, Lockridge Library, or Anacostia Library are all options. Other questions or concerns around vaccination? Are there any concerns from the board about the draft policy that you saw on Saturday?
No questions.
No questions.
Questions from staff. Would you like to see the policy, staff, to read through it? Not very interested. Got it. All right. So if there are no other questions, the vaccination policy also has in the procedures, there are 2 forms, the medical exemption form and the religious accommodation request as well, that will all be voted in tandem. Is there a motion?
So I make a motion that the board adopts the COVID vaccination as well as the request for accommodation for both medical and religious accommodations.
Is there a second?
I second.
Been moved by Mr. Darrell Gaston, seconded by Clyde Edwards. As normal, we will vote by saying aye by roll call. Mr. Early.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gaston.
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
Ms. Warren.
Abstain.
And Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Right, we have a 501 vote to accept the vaccination policy as submitted. Dr. Lodi, before I move to the next one, do you foresee, or I guess, or Julian, challenges that the board should know about on implementing this policy by your September 19th deadline?
No, I don't foresee any potential challenges. We've been talking about it internally for a while because it's been in the news. And we talked about it today in our all staff meeting. So it won't be a surprise. Everyone is ready for it. I think that meeting Saturday's deadline is going to be tough for some. So the more pressing conversation we might need to have is, what do we do with those individuals? Is there a window post September 19th if someone is to get their shot next Wednesday, for example?
Right.
What would be the overlap policy? Or is it going to be a hard line for September 19th to either have an exemption of vaccination or your employment ceases? So that would be the only gray area, that overlap time, if someone is to get vaccinated after Saturday, what would be the board's response for that?
Yeah. Without having thought very much about it, I don't speak for the board, but I think the immediate answer would be that person would, if they got a late shot, they would need to be off work or work from home for 2 days while they catch up. I mean, I don't think that we would have to terminate somebody because they got into the process 2 days late. But I think there's a difference between I did get my shot before Saturday, but I got it on Tuesday or Wednesday versus I haven't gotten it yet on Monday and it's not scheduled yet.
Understood.
And then I can also say there's still the one-shot J&J that's available as well, just in case if somebody ponders after Saturday's first shot deadline to then say, okay, I want to get the shot. There is the J&J.
Darrell, do you know if the city is still paying $51 for referrals for shots?
Yes.
They are?
Yes.
I have a COVID door knock, a COVID canvas team. I am happy to transport anybody from your school who wants to go and get the vaccination the rest of the week. If they'll call my office, 202-563-5200, we can get them rides and get them vaccinated any day this week, including Saturday and Sunday.
Okay, thank you. We also provide paid time off as part of our incentive for vaccination, and that does not impact their annual balance. So we give them the day off to get vaccinated, and if necessary, the day after, should there be any impact felt from that shot.
Get to sleep it off.
Exactly, it's a twofer.
Wow, if I could coordinate my shot with Labor Day and Rejuvenation Day, I could create a 10-day week, huh?
Thinking.
A 10-day week.
All right. Thank you for that on vaccination. Ms. Mitchell. Additional resources. You wanted to add HR and
CAO, Chief Academic Officer.
Yeah.
I know internally I kind of brought this up, but I think that just given, what I earlier said, just about being more aggressive, about improving our tier status, to get more serious about improving our standing, and just looking at the budget and having budget discussions. It's wonderful that we've been able to save money and continue to build on our reserve. But if we are not progressing academically, with money still on the books, then what are we really doing? So it is my hope that we can, build out the C-suite that we envisioned over the past couple years. Actually start the process of doing that. Well, continue the process of doing that now. We've already begun the process of building out our C-suite, but just to continue on that work. And we've already got documentation, about what that would look like. We've already dreamed it out. We've approved it. And I'm ready to move with some fervor and some intention in that direction. So it's my hope that, we can introduce a chief academic officer into the mix and into the family. Also, given the fact that so many circumstances have arisen recently where an HR manager would have been really, really helpful, I think we should also prioritize introducing an HR manager into the family. Someone who sits outside of the hierarchy, and it's, I don't know, maybe even contracting an HR firm or, making a hire, but in any event, just in a separate external unit to manage our human resource functions. That's what I wanted to bring up. Would it be appropriate at this juncture, Monica, to introduce a motion regarding those additional resources?
It's always appropriate. The second decides whether it gets voted on, but it's always appropriate to motion.
Wonderful.
Before you do that, I have just a couple questions though.
Sure.
Talking about the easy, in my mind, the easier one first, which is the HR functions.
Okay.
And I just want to just go on the record to say that Julian has, in my opinion, done a yeoman's job at operations in some really tough times. And in each example of when something fell apart, Julian has graciously kind of taken it on. And the HR function was one of those things that when he was brought on, we had two separate jobs. And when Appling left us, he just assumed that work. And I recognize that we've given him a lot of extra duties, HR, space planning, technology distribution that probably were not considered when he was hired. So I clearly want to go on the record and speak to our ability to balance responsibility better. And I thank Julian, and I don't want Julian to believe that this conversation for me is about non-performance. I think you've held down the fort extremely well. But I want to go on the record. I think it makes sense that we invest in somebody who can be responsible, fully responsible for all the HR functions. But more importantly, now we've added some more, like collecting backstation cards. The second is probably a bigger lift for the organization. And it is one that I would encourage my colleagues to be very thoughtful about how they approach it, and how we clearly think about what the scope is for that new chief, and how we see all of these actions aligning with and supporting our overall mission. I don't want us to get caught up in a situation where we look back in 6 months and say, oh, we didn't think about that part. But other than that, that's my 2 cents for whatever. It's probably not worth 2 cents, but that's what it is. Ms. Mitchell.
And I would like to hear Dr. Henry's thoughts on adding the new position of Chief Academic Officer.
Thank you. I have been thinking about it since seeing the plan last August, where that would fit, and definitely in terms of where we sit in terms of our tier fall from 2 to 3, and then how we get to tier 1. One thing that I did notice was that there was not a firm plan for us to move that progress and achievement gains, which is what we realigned our resources to for this year. And so I think that person to be able to have a higher level view and perspective of what needs to be done, and monitoring that strategic plan to link us with benchmarks to make sure that we hit that tier. And I'm thinking of it in terms of, since we are trending with 3 for this year, and next year is a reset year, just to not have, okay, we're going to jump to tier 1 in 1 year, but at least have a gradual, be aggressive, but have a gradual plan of moving us systematically, so we have policies and procedures that support compliance, and so that we move to a tier 1 status and stay there, to sustain that. And so I'm definitely glad to hear that being brought on a little faster than I guess was originally planned.
Dr. Henry, if you had to think about the 3 responsibilities that this new chief should absolutely have in his job description, what would they be?
Well, one would definitely be to make sure that we are monitoring academic gains. And so that is looking at our data in a way where we're looking at not only content for certification pathways or GED pathways, but also it has to be that layer of targeted support around making sure students are making gains. And that will be one area. The other would be managing the professional development and the growth plan of the organization. And thirdly, building the infrastructure for growth beyond just the tier one, but to expand our pathways. And that'll include working with partnerships, because we have a lot of opportunities that are available. I think particularly in our college and career pathway. And we have an opportunity to tap into the 18 and 25-year-old population that's coming out of high schools in DC that are maybe not prepared for community college, but that can go through our preparation program with us. And we'd also be able to expand that pathway. This year we had 6 students, and I think the opportunity for expanding that pathway as well as the others are key features and key functions that this person would be looking at, or should be looking at.
Dr. Lodi, your thoughts?
Well, I'm definitely in favor of bringing on a chief academic officer. And one of the reasons is we have an opportunity for this reset year that we are about to embark on to really change the entire trajectory of the school. And I think that having a chief level focus on strategy, oversight, design, development, professional development allows the academics and training team to have solid foresight and structure in where the unit and our practices within the organization need to go academically to get us to where we need to be. I think the goal for any organization should be sustainable growth, right? And that can only be achieved over time. The overnight success looks great in a report, but it's hard to sustain. And some of the big charter networks have experienced that. And you end up like, going further back behind than you started after not being able to sustain the amount of work that it gets to get to where you need to be overnight, right? So slow and steady wins the race. And I do believe that we are being given an opportunity of a lifetime with the COVID exemption policy to really design a structure and system that supports the slow and steady growth that I think we need to focus on. But one of the conversations we have as a senior leadership team is about our internal capacity, doing what we can do, and this would allow a little bit of breathing room in the A&T team to absorb some of the more long-term thinking, but while providing concrete support for the day-to-day guidance to move the academic growth along. The only thing about it is the board would need to consider adjusting our current budget surplus goal, because the expenditures for both the HR function and the CAO would have to come from our 10% savings that was preset at the start of the budget planning process if these initiatives were to be implemented this year.
Yeah, good point. Do you see any inefficient overlap between a chief academic officer and our current staffing plan?
I think to answer that, I would need to see a scope side by side.
Okay.
Because I don't know. I know what chief academic officers do in other adult charters. Academy of Hope is hiring one right now, and they've had a hard time finding one. I'm sorry, the family place is hiring a chief academic officer right now, and they're having a hard time finding one, mostly because they're looking for a bilingual candidate, but the scope itself seems very redundant to what we currently have. So I think designing a chief academic officer that truly is a chief academic officer and not a glorified principal that you find in other schools. It's just a title, but you're really a principal. That would be what would differentiate us. And so I would need to see what the expected scope of this the second CAO would be within the organization, CAO2, and then I can. Well, first of all, we would design it so there wouldn't be redundancy and overlap, right? But secondly, it would give us a clearer picture of what kind of candidate would best fit that role.
That's fair.
And then to speak to the HR piece, I love the idea, and I would suggest the board consider contracting out to really remove that individual from the chain.
Yep. Fair comments. Dr. Spinner, does bringing on a chief academic officer strengthen our ability for renewal despite a reset? Is it a compelling argument to the charter authority that we're serious about this change by bringing on this new person, and how does it impact our accreditation renewal, if at all?
I don't believe it would have major impact on accreditation renewal, because we learned recently that the guidelines for accreditation will be the same as they were under advanced ed. And if you recall, that area was not one that came up as an area of difficulty. However, I do think that there is a need to separate the building of professionalism and this whole set of issues around moving our students from traditional classrooms to the kind of dual learning that we've talked about. And someone has to be overseeing that and ensuring that as we look at tiering, it is being taken into consideration. While the Public Charter School Board has had a performance management framework for 5 years now, it's been changed, and ceilings and floors have changed every year. I am hopeful that this ED will not do that, and that setting the baseline and having someone who is able to monitor that baseline and make adjustments in concert with the director of academics and training becomes critically important. So from a point of view of external context, I think it's the right thing to do, being very clear about the relationship between and among the chief academic officer, the director of academics and training, and the CEO is going to be very important.
Julian, how you feel about supporting another person?
I can take all the support I can get.
Questa, you ready to, how would you tell this story?
Which story? Sorry.
The story about a chief academic officer.
Just about the experience they could bring in and how it impacts the students and how it can take CCPrep above and beyond.
Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, questions? Things that we should have considered? I guess I didn't ask Ms. Bostic. Ms. Bostic, what do you think? You are, I know you're student success now, but you are an old teacher, right? So you get this. What do you think?
So I think that it would help to have someone who can move away from the day-to-day and focus on a large picture, looking at research to address best practices, areas for growth, looking at andragogy, and understanding what we need to push ourselves forward. When you're on the director's level, you are on the ground level. And sometimes you can't have that big picture thinking because you don't have the time. So I think it will only help us to further our cause, to meet our students where we are, and to push the envelope when it comes to adult learners. We definitely want to be the premier adult charter school. So we definitely are going to need some, a greater push and some more research to really just invigorate our curriculum, to think through what is most impactful for the community we serve, and to move us to the next level.
It's interesting, the thing that you said that really resonated with me is the research part. And we talked a lot about over the weekend that you guys are so busy with the day-to-day, just kind of keeping us afloat. And Jason's favorite term is unpeeling the onion, right? That you don't have an opportunity to just dream or do the research behind a decision. You're responding to conditions on a daily basis. So I think the research is a really key piece that we should consider in this conversation. Other thought, I know this is wasn't on the agenda. You didn't get to think about it beforehand. But are there other thoughts?
I'm just thinking that I appreciate the motions being brought up, but maybe instead of us doing a vote on the position, we should do a vote to write a description of the position to figure out exactly what it would entail and look like.
Is that a motion?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, it's a question. Ms. Mitchell, I guess, Darrell, did you have something to say?
Sure. I mean, I support both the HR and the CAO. I think since being on the board, there hasn't been really much discussion about how do we strengthen and improve the academic side. It's been more so about, I guess, tagging here, tagging there. So having someone who has not been a part of the CCPrep family come in and do a third eye or outside analysis about where they see their weaknesses from an academic standpoint would definitely be helpful. And particularly because we're going through a renewal process, this person would take away from the added stress and focus primarily just on improving academics. And I think as Dr. Wallace said, it's not the expectation that we're going to go from a tier 3 to tier 1, but being able to figure out how we move from tier 3 to a stable tier 2. So I support it. And I don't think voting on this means we're going to hire someone tomorrow, but we can do what Javonda stated, which is look at what the job description could be, and then come back and figure out how do we then put it out there. But I would support Ashley's motion for both the HR director and the CAO.
Ms. Mitchell, what is your pleasure?
Well, that said, I'd like to move to add a chief academic officer and human resource manager to the CCPrep family. Understanding that there's a process in doing so, and we would start by building out a position description without role redundancies.
Ms. Mitchell, Chris, you have something? I'm sorry.
Nope, just moving my hand. I'm good.
Oh, okay. Ashley, I did a lesson in SMART goal setting today. So I'm stuck on that. But your motion is to add these when and how much time for prep to make this move?
Sure. I would love to have a position description together by October 1. approved and hit the streets with them shortly thereafter.
So for you're suggesting for hiring this school year?
I am.
And I'm sorry that I don't know the budget by memory in that detail. And I know we had some contingency. Jason, do you remember what contingency was built into the budget?
We always did a 10% off the top. We call it contingency because there is no line item for savings.
Got it. And there are a few positions, I guess I'll need to turn to Jason to give us, Julian, I'm sorry, to give us, this year, there's been some positions that have gone unfilled. What the two that come to mind are the two social workers that are not filled to date. So there is some internal savings through attrition that we've not spent. So to get a good year to date on what that savings looks like, Julian, would be helpful in this conversation. Just from staff savings, not anything else. Like if you've not spent all your supplies money, I'm not talking about just staff decisions.
Contingency is 825.11. That's how much we budget for it. And for the positions of staff, right now we have, just give me 1 second.
825.111 or 011?
So for the two staff, the social workers that we weren't able to hire, we have 130K with both positions. And then for contingency, let me just grab it right here. We have, sorry, give me 1 second, I just pulled this.
And also just to let you know, we are also receiving our new SOAR allotment, and the primary focus of SOAR, which is the funding that comes to us each year from OSSI, is for academic enhancement. And so there can be a line item in the upcoming SOAR grant where we take a piece of the CAO's salary as part of the reimbursement for the grant. So that is also another way that we can help fund some of these previously unbudgeted positions.
Okay, that's helpful. And I assume I'm not sure that any of us have seen the SOAR budget by itself. So we don't know really what's there now versus later. And I know you have your SOAR is enhanced this year, right? Because of COVID.
Correct, yes.
So, and we've not seen your plan to spend that money as well, right?
Right, we haven't crafted, we have until September 30th to craft it. And so I've been asking the senior leaders and the board as well to do a dream sheet of how that money would like to be spent.
And what is the SOAR amount over and above what's normal? I know we're normal like at 120, right?
Right, so it's 120 and we're getting another allocation of $118,452.68 for the fiscal year 21 academic quality. And on top of that, we're getting the enhancement from ESSER of an additional $329,572.34 for a grand total of 448,025.02.
And those dollars, not the 120 piece, but the 118 and the 329 have to be spent within 2 years?
So the 118,452 is typically an annual allotment. So that has to be spent in fiscal year 21.
That's what I'm calling the 120, right?
Right. Yeah. The
Okay.
329 is the multi-year 2023, I believe.
Okay.
We have to allocate it by September 30th. Of course, we can always modify it as the year goes on, but we have to tell OSSI how we're going to spend all that money by September 30th, knowing we have several years to draw down from that.
Gotcha.
We're also going to be getting another $160,000 or so specifically for facilities. And that's a formula grant coming from the Deputy Mayor for Education's office as part of the mayor's $10 million charter school incentive from the just passed fiscal year budget for the board.
Gotcha. Got it. So we'll kind of keep these budget numbers in the back of our head as we think about what our capacity for new staff is.
Yes.
Jason, I want you to take the short version, not the long version, but you talked a little bit about, you asked, had the board talked about or thought about school size as an innovative approach to increasing our performance benchmarks. And this was from our one-on-one call this week, guys. But I wanted Jason to talk a little bit about his thought on the reset. You know, we've talked about school size from a different perspective, which is really about how does our staffing plan jive with actual numbers of students in the building. And those of you who've been around for a while have heard me talk about we train to fight at 600, and then our walk around weight is something like 200 or 250. So what do we do with that excess staff capacity? But Jason has a thought about maybe looking at a smaller school to increase performance. Jason, are you prepared to share that yet?
Sure. I think the challenge is going to be to give the short version.
Oh, okay.
I always expand upon my thoughts. So yeah, so I even remember when I was interviewing for the CEO position, I mentioned that sometimes in order to get the gains you're looking for, you have to shrink before you grow again. And part of it has to do with being able to focus on a smaller group of students and firm up the academic approach, the support system, the internal policies, the way interventions are done, the way things are, instruction is being delivered, assessments are done, and tracking that, and then establishing a solid process without having to manage the large number of students and tracking down students and running after them and circling back and rebooking and things like that. So taking a step back and having a smaller school where we can really focus on setting a solid foundation from the academic side. And then from there, growth makes logical sense because you can then just build upon the successes that you have. When you look at the adult charters across the district, we're the second largest. The more successful, and I say more successful from a quantitative perspective, there are other adult charters more successful than CCPrep. Their carry weight is between 200 and 300 students. But they also have a similar staffing plan that we do. So when you look at the intensity in which you have that lower student teacher ratio or support student ratio, you're able to have a higher level of oversight and accountability. And so that has always been a thought of mine. I remember talking about it once before, but it does have negative implications on our facility, because from a funding perspective, the feedback I got was that funders are not going to see that as a positive because your projected revenue is, of course, much lower. So the amount of students we could reduce would be nominal to the point where it didn't make sense to reduce the number and still be within favor of funders externally for but for space planning purposes. And so that I think is something the board might want to consider as a strategy, especially in a as we go to aggressive approaches to move the school to where we all want it to be. I'm not sure if even with a chief academic officer, 600 students is a good starting point for our student population.
So thank you, just some food for thought for the board as we kind of wrestle with who we are and what we want to be, and how we get there. So for your future conversations. Other questions, concerns, things that we should have talked about but did not?
Yeah, I have another question for the role of the chief academic officer. Who would be in charge of reviewing and interviewing and ultimately choosing the applicants for the position?
So all of our chiefs are hired by the board. I would imagine that we would convene a similar program that we did for our CEO search, where it was a combination of board and staff that sat on interviews. We paneled it, and we paneled it up to the top 5 candidates, and then they came before the board. I think, Ms. Bosky, were you a part of that process at all?
No, not that one.
You weren't. I know we had some staff, maybe all those staff.
We had like Ms. Harris was part of it, I recall.
I was going to say I was a part of the last paneling, but more importantly, I had the opportunity to hear from staff in terms of their reactions to it. And it was very positive that staff was able to panel to the point where they knew who was coming down to the last 5. And they felt like someone had heard their concerns and the things that were important to them. So having that kind of staffing involvement was, I believe, a very positive thing.
Even for staff who didn't physically panel the interviews, I went to all team and took questions from staff to take back to interviews.
I agree with Ms. Bennett. It definitely was a lot of positive energy around just staff voice and having an input on our new leader. So I definitely, we can repeat that. I think it would be awesome.
Other questions, concerns, comments? We have completed our agenda, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
One moment, please. We didn't vote.
Oh,
Yeah, I was gonna say we didn't vote on it.
Sorry. Thank you. So the motion by Ms. Mitchell is to, I took some notes I would forget, but I turned the page. Is to develop the position descriptions no later than October 1 for HR, that to be determined whether contracted or internal, but definitely a separate function from the organization, and a position description for a new chief for academic, with the search happening in the last quarter of 2021, with the hopes to bring on both positions in this school year. We will contemplate how we fund that from a combination of unfilled staff positions in this year's budget, contingency considerations, and possibly the enhancement SOAR dollars before final selection or approval of the search process. Is there a second?
I second.
Been moved by Ashley, seconded by Clyde. We're going to ask everybody in favor to say aye. Mr. Early.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gaston.
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Ms. Warren.
Aye.
This unanimous vote to pursue filling these two, filling one position and creating another. Thank you for your time. If there's no other comments or questions, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Just one question before we adjourn. Is it our intent not to fill the social worker positions?
Well, and Jason, I'll let you finish, but we tried to fill them this year. And what we learned really quickly is that social workers have to work under a licensed clinician in order to work. They can't just have groups at our school without having that supervision required. So our design wasn't necessarily foolproof. It was a great idea, concept that wasn't completely flushed out, right? So one of the things we're going to work on is thinking about the ideas before we run down the path. But as a result of not being able to fill, we actually had hired one before we realized that it couldn't work. But I've talked with Dr. Lodi about doing some research around the neighborhood community-based organizations that are doing mental health, like the MBIs of the world or the one on the Avenue. To see if there are resources out there that can fill that role without the liability that it places on the school to have that licensed clinician on staff.
Okay, and DBH has an amazing program too.
Say it again.
DBH has an amazing school-based program as well.
Okay, so Dr. Lodi, you're gonna get started on doing the research. I suggested MBI, and I can't remember the name of the one that's in the 3100 block of MLK Avenue. But we should add DBH to the conversations, try to identify a source. I think this task should be suited for Ms. Webster's group of people to kind of fit in the wellness piece to figure out how we find those resources in our community. Dr. Lodi?
Yes, and we have an upcoming meeting with Hillcrest, which will be a CBO that has partnered with the Department of Behavioral Health. So for that DBH clinician that will be on site at CCPrep, they have to come from one of the approved CBOs, and so Hillcrest has reached out to us to set up a meeting to talk about clinician placement. But again, that is not in place of, but to support existing wellness and mental health wellness planning. So looking at these other CBOs for partnerships is on our action item right now.
I can't believe that I forgot about Hillcrest. Miss Juanita Price is a dynamic leader. I think that there'll be a great relation. Chris, they are in the old Eastern Rivers.
You know what, Monica? I've known Ms. Price since probably me being a freshman year in high school.
Are you serious?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She they lived in Toledo for a while. So yeah, I know Mr. and Mrs. Price. So
but she's
Ms. Price is yeah. Well, you're saying that because she's a Delta, but no, I'm just teasing. No, she is dynamic. She knows her stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, that's she's close, right? So I mean,
yeah, she reached out to us yesterday to set up that meeting. So
nice.
That's great.
Very nice. Very nice.
All right, I have nothing else, and I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Excellent. Have a great night. Thank you guys for your time as always. Board, for your leadership, for staff, for always speaking up and pressing the point to do better for our students. So thank you all for your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Have a good one.